A ruthless billionaire was about to destroy a neighborhood. He had the money, the lawyers, and the power to erase hundreds of veterans from their homes to build a luxury resort. But he had no idea that the one thing keeping his severely autistic daughter connected to the world was suddenly bleeding to death. Her therapy dog needed a miracle. Specifically, a canine blood type so rare that it could not be bought for any price. And for 2 years, one anonymous soldier and his German shepherd had been quietly donating that exact blood, saving this billionaire's family without ever knowing who they were. Then, on the exact night the eviction notices went out, the truth was revealed. The billionaire stood face to face with the anonymous hero, realizing the man he was throwing out onto the street was the very man rushing across the city at midnight to save his daughter's life. What happened next would either prove that money buys everything or completely shatter an empire of pride. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. The alarm clock glowed red in the dark room. 0400 hours. Mark opened his eyes. Before the sound even registered, he reached out and pressed the button. The room fell silent again. Mark sat up on the edge of the narrow bed. He was an active-duty Navy SEAL in his early 30s. He had short-cropped hair, broad shoulders, and a quiet face that rarely gave away his thoughts. He wore a plain gray t-shirt and dark shorts. Beside the bed, a large shape stirred. Rex lifted his head. He was a German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat, a dark muzzle, and sharp amber eyes. He let out a low breath and stood up. He stretched his front legs and looked at Mark. They did not need to make a sound. Dogs do not need words to understand the weight their owners carry. They read the tension in the jaw and the heavy rhythm of footsteps. Rex knew the routine. Mark put on his running shoes. He tied the laces tight. He grabbed a leash from the hook by the door, though he rarely needed to use it. They walked out of the apartment and descended the metal stairs. The air in San Diego felt cool this early in the morning. A salty breeze blew in from the ocean. They lived in a low-income apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. The paint on the outer walls peeled in several places. The asphalt in the parking lot had deep cracks, but the walkways remained spotless. The residents here took pride in what little they had. Most of them were active-duty military or veterans. Mark and Rex started their run. They moved out of the complex and headed toward the coastline. Their paws and feet hit the pavement in a steady, synchronized rhythm. Mark kept his breathing even. He focused on the path ahead. Rex stayed right by his side. The dog never drifted or chased after wild animals. They ran for 5 miles, as the sky slowly turned from black to a pale blue. They returned to the complex just as the sun began to rise. An older man stood outside the ground-floor unit. He had a thick gray beard and leaned heavily on a wooden cane. He wore a faded olive jacket. This was Mr. Henderson, a veteran from a different era. "Morning, Mark," Henderson said. His voice sounded rough, like dry gravel. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," Mark replied. He stopped and let Rex walk over. The German shepherd sniffed the old man's hand and sat down patiently. "Taking him in today?" Henderson asked. He reached out and patted the dog on the head. "Yes, sir, it is that time of the month," Mark said. "Good man. Good dog," Henderson nodded. He turned and slowly made his way back inside his apartment. Mark walked upstairs. He fed Rex a bowl of high-protein kibble. He took a quick, cold shower. He put on a clean black t-shirt, dark denim jeans, and heavy boots. He moved with the precision of a man who measured his life in seconds. He grabbed his keys and headed back out the door. Rex followed close behind. They got into an old, faded blue pickup truck. Mark turned the key. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. He backed out of the space and drove toward downtown San Diego. The scenery outside the window shifted rapidly. The cracked roads and small diners of their neighborhood disappeared. Soon, smooth paved streets and towering glass buildings replaced them. Expensive cars lined the sidewalks. Palm trees swayed perfectly in the morning wind. They had entered a different world, a world of wealth and pristine perfection. Mark parked the truck in a designated spot behind a sleek, modern building. The sign above the glass doors read Coastal Elite Veterinary Pavilion. Mark opened the passenger door. Rex jumped down and sat right beside Mark's leg. They walked through the automatic sliding doors. The waiting room smelled of lavender and expensive cleaning solutions. Soft jazz played from unseen speakers. A woman with a tiny poodle sat on a velvet couch. She glanced at Mark and Rex. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the large, muscular German shepherd and the serious man in military boots. She pulled her small dog closer. Mark ignored her. He walked to the front desk. The receptionist smiled warmly. She recognized them immediately. "Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Rex," she said. "Morning, Sarah," Mark said. "We have an appointment. Dr. Evans is waiting for you in room 4. "Go right ahead," she said. Mark led Rex down a pristine white hallway. They entered room 4. Dr. Evans stood by a stainless steel table. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair tied in a neat bun. She wore a spotless white coat. She smiled as they walked in. "Hello, boys," Dr. Evans said. She walked over and rubbed Rex behind the ears. The dog leaned into her hand and wagged his tail once. "Ready when you are, Doc," Mark said. "He is always a perfect gentleman," Dr. Evans said. She guided Rex onto a soft mat on the floor. She did not use the cold metal table. "Sit, Rex! Lie down!" Rex obeyed instantly. He laid his large head on his paws and watched Dr. Evans, prepared a needle and a collection bag. She moved efficiently. 2 years ago, Mark brought Rex in for a minor cut on his paw. A routine blood test revealed something extraordinary. Rex possessed a negative blood type that lacked a specific antigen. It was an incredibly rare blood type in the canine world. He was a universal donor for a very specific, hard-to-treat genetic blood disorder. "You know, Mark, Doctor," Evans said as she carefully inserted the needle into Rex's foreleg. "We had another clinic call us yesterday looking for this exact blood type. They had nothing. You and Rex provide the only steady supply in the entire state. Glad we can help," Mark said. He knelt beside Rex and stroked the dog's thick neck. Rex did not flinch. He just kept his amber eyes locked on Mark. Dark red blood began to flow through the tube into the plastic bag. This was their secret. Every single month for the past 2 years, they made this drive. Mark did not know which dog received the blood. He never asked. The clinic maintained strict donor anonymity. He only knew that somewhere in this wealthy city, another animal lived because of his dog. "I can authorize a payment for this, Doctor," Evans said quietly. She watched the bag fill. "Your blood donations are saving a life. We have a fund. The recipient's owner pays handsomely for these transfusions. You could use the extra money." Mark shook his head. His expression remained hard and unreadable. "No," Mark said. "We do not sell life. We just give it." Dr. Evans sighed softly. She had offered every month. Mark had refused every month. She respected him too much to push the issue further. She watched the man and his dog in silence. They lived in a rundown apartment. They drove a beat-up truck. They possessed almost nothing of material value. Yet they sat in this luxurious clinic, freely giving away the most valuable resource in the building. The bag filled completely. Dr. Evans carefully removed the needle and applied a small bandage to Rex's leg. She handed Mark a small bag of premium dog treats. "Thank you, Mark. Keep him hydrated today," she said. "Always," Mark said. He stood up. "Come on, buddy. Let us go home." Rex stood up, shook his coat, and walked out of the room right beside his owner. They walked out of the clinic, out of the wealthy neighborhood, and drove back toward their quiet, unseen life. They had no idea that their quiet secret was about to collide violently with the very forces threatening to destroy their home. Richard Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse. He looked down at the sprawling city of San Diego. He was 52 years old, tall, and dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Silver hair framed his sharp, unyielding face. He built an empire in real estate by seeing numbers instead of people. He bought land, demolished old structures, and erected monuments of glass and steel. He controlled everything in his business. Yet, inside his own home, he possessed no control at all. He turned away from the glass and walked down the wide, silent hallway. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum. White marble floors reflected the morning light. Expensive abstract paintings hung on pristine walls. But the silence broke suddenly. A high-pitched scream echoed from the end of the hall. Richard tightened his jaw and quickened his pace. He pushed open the heavy oak door to the master bedroom. His 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sat in the corner of the room. She pressed her back against the wall and covered her ears with both hands. Her eyes squeezed shut. She rocked back and forth violently. Lily suffered from severe autism. The world constantly overwhelmed her senses. A sudden noise, a bright light, or an unfamiliar texture could send her into a state of absolute terror. Richard knelt a few feet away from her. He did not reach out. Experience taught him that touching her right now would only make the panic worse. "Lily," Richard said softly, "it is just the wind against the window. You are safe." The girl did not hear him. She continued to scream, a raw sound of pure fear. Richard felt a familiar, heavy knot form in his stomach. Wealth creates an illusion of control, but illness strips that illusion away in a matter of seconds. He had billions of dollars in his bank accounts, but he could not buy peace of mind for his only child. A soft clicking sound came from the doorway. Bella, a golden retriever with a pale, silky coat, walked into the room. She moved slowly, her steps heavy and deliberate. Bella was a highly trained therapy dog. More importantly, she was Lily's only anchor to reality. Bella approached the corner. She did not bark or whine. She simply lay down on the floor right next to Lily and rested her large head on the girl's trembling knee. Lily stopped rocking. She kept her eyes closed, but one small hand slowly moved away from her ear. Her fingers found Bella's soft fur. She buried her hand in the golden coat. Her breathing began to slow down. The screams turned into soft whimpers, and then silence. Lily opened her eyes and looked at the dog. A faint, fragile smile appeared on her face. Richard let out a long breath. He looked at the golden retriever with profound gratitude, but his relief vanished when he noticed Bella's eyes. They looked dull. The dog's gums appeared pale, almost white. Bella rested her head heavily, lacking her usual quiet energy. Richard pulled out his phone and dialed a private number. Dr. Evans answered on the second ring. "Richard," Dr. Evans said, "I was just about to call you." "Bella looks weak today," Richard said, keeping his voice low so he would not disturb Lily. "Her energy is fading again. Her gums have no color." "I ran her latest blood panels this morning," Dr. Evans replied. Her voice sounded tight. "Her red blood cell count is dropping faster than we anticipated. The autoimmune condition is aggressively attacking the new cells. She is metabolizing the transfusions at an alarming rate." "Then we need to do another transfusion," Richard demanded. "Name the price. I will write the check right now." "It is not about money, Richard, Doctor," Evans explained patiently. "Bella has an extremely rare negative blood type. We cannot synthesize it. We cannot substitute it. We rely entirely on a single, anonymous, local donor. That donor just came in this morning. I have the blood, but we are draining this resource to the absolute limit." "Find out who owns the donor dog," Richard ordered. He paced out into the hallway. "I will buy the dog. I will hire the owner. Whatever they want." "You know the rules, Doctor," Evans said firmly. "Strict donor anonymity. I cannot and will not break that trust. Bring Bella in this afternoon for the transfusion. But Richard, you need to understand something. If her body keeps destroying the cells this quickly, the anonymous donor might not be enough next time." The call ended. Richard stared at his phone. He hated the feeling of helplessness. He hated depending on a nameless stranger for his daughter's happiness. He shoved the phone into his pocket and walked to his private elevator. He had a business empire to run. An hour later, Richard stood behind a podium in a crowded press room downtown. Camera flashes illuminated his face. Reporters held up microphones. The vulnerability he showed in his daughter's bedroom completely disappeared. He wore the armor of a ruthless billionaire. Today, Sterling Enterprises is proud to announce our most ambitious project to date. Richard spoke into the microphones. His voice projected power and absolute certainty. We call it the Ocean View Oasis. It will be the premier luxury resort destination on the West Coast. A large screen behind him lit up. It displayed a brilliant digital rendering of towering glass hotels, pristine swimming pools, and high-end retail stores. This project will bring thousands of jobs and billions in revenue to San Diego, Richard continued. We have officially acquired the necessary zoning permits for the coastal district. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. Mr. Sterling, the proposed site currently houses the Vista Point Apartments. That complex provides low-income housing for hundreds of military veterans. What will happen to them? Richard did not blink. His expression remained stone cold. Progress requires change. We have issued the standard 30-day eviction notices. They will receive the minimum relocation assistance required by law. We are well within our legal rights to clear that land. But these are veterans, another reporter pressed. Many of them have nowhere else to go. This is real estate, not a charity, Richard stated firmly. The land has immense value. We are unlocking that value. Thank you, that will be all. He stepped away from the podium and ignored the shouting journalists. He walked out of the room flanked by his security team. Richard Sterling felt no guilt. In his mind, the weak always made way for the strong. He did not realize that the very people he prepared to crush held the key to the only life he truly cared about. The sun beat down on the concrete walkway of the Vista Point Apartments. Mark parked his faded blue truck in his usual spot. He stepped out and whistled once. Rex jumped down from the passenger seat and landed lightly on the asphalt. The German shepherd stayed close to Mark's side. They walked toward the stairwell. Something felt wrong. The usual afternoon quiet had shattered. Several residents stood outside their doors. They held pieces of paper. They spoke in low, anxious voices. Mark noticed a bright yellow envelope taped to his own front door on the second floor. He took the stairs 2 at a time. Rex followed right behind him. Mark pulled the envelope off the wood. He opened it and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. The bold letters at the top read, "Notice to vacate." The document stated that Sterling Enterprises now owned the property. All residents had 30 days to leave. A piece of paper holds no physical weight, but it can crush a man's life in an instant. Mark stared at the black ink. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Footsteps sounded on the metal walkway. Mr. Henderson walked toward Mark. The older man leaned heavily on his wooden cane. His face looked paler than usual. He clutched an identical yellow envelope in his wrinkled hand. "Did you get one too?" Henderson asked. His rough voice trembled slightly. "I got one," Mark said. He folded the papers and shoved them into his back pocket. "I have lived here for 15 years, Henderson said. He looked down at the courtyard. "My wife passed away in that apartment. My pension barely covers food and medicine. Where do they expect me to go?" Mark looked around. He saw other veterans holding the same notices. He saw Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 70s, wiping her eyes with a tissue. He saw Tom, a former Marine who lost a leg overseas, staring blankly at his door. This building housed people who had sacrificed everything for their country. Now, a billionaire wanted to pave over their lives for a luxury resort. "We fight it," Mark said. His voice turned hard. "They cannot just throw us out. There are laws." For the next 3 weeks, Mark fought. He applied his military discipline to the civilian world. He used every hour of his leave time from the Navy base. He organized the residents. They gathered in the small courtyard every evening to plan their next moves. Mark built a command center on a folding table. He called local news stations. He contacted legal aid offices. He reached out to veteran support organizations across the state. A young lawyer named David Vance offered to help them pro bono. David was a recent law school graduate who worked out of a cramped office downtown. He wore cheap suits and carried a battered leather briefcase. He looked exhausted but determined. He sat at the folding table in the courtyard and carefully reviewed the eviction notices. "Sterling Enterprises covers their tracks perfectly," David said. He rubbed his eyes and pointed at a clause in the document. They bought the land through a series of anonymous shell companies. They secured the zoning changes quietly over the past 6 months. The city council approved everything last week. Legally, they own the ground beneath your feet. "So we just pack up and leave?" Tom asked. He gripped his crutches tightly. "Just like that? We do not even get a hearing?" "I will file an emergency injunction to buy us more time," David replied. He packed the papers back into his briefcase. "I will argue that the relocation assistance does not meet state requirements for disabled veterans. It is a very long shot, but we have to try to force a delay." Mark nodded. He went back to making phone calls. He stood outside the local news station for 4 solid hours until a producer finally agreed to speak with him. The producer listened, took notes, and promised to air a segment on the evening broadcast. The segment aired the next night at 11 o'clock. It lasted exactly 45 seconds. The news anchor mentioned the housing dispute, showed a brief clip of the apartments, and immediately cut to a commercial break. The story gained absolutely no traction. The public cared more about the upcoming luxury resort and the promised jobs than a small group of displaced veterans. The injunction failed miserably. Sterling's legal team crushed David Vance in court within 20 minutes. They sent 3 senior corporate lawyers in expensive custom suits. The corporate lawyers did not argue passionately. They simply presented a mountain of signed documents, city ordinances, and strict legal precedents. The judge ruled in favor of Sterling Enterprises without hesitation. The 30-day timeline remained intact. The law protected the property owner, not the people living on the property. Mark stood in the courtyard on the 28th day. The air felt heavy and thick. Moving boxes piled up outside doors like barricades. A few residents had already left to stay with distant relatives or in crowded temporary shelters. Mr. Henderson sat on a plastic chair outside his ground-floor unit. He stared at a cardboard box filled with old photographs and military medals. He looked entirely defeated. The fight had drained the last bit of energy from his old bones. "I found a room in a boarding house across town," Henderson told Mark. He did not look up from the box. "It is very small. They do not allow pets, but it has a roof." Mark felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He patted the old man on the shoulder and walked upstairs to his own apartment. Rex waited for him by the door. The apartment looked completely bare. Mark had packed his few belongings into 3 military duffel bags. He had nowhere to go yet. He could sleep in his truck, but he needed a safe and cool place for Rex. The dog sensed Mark's deep distress. Rex pressed his large head against Mark's leg and let out a soft whine. Mark knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog's thick neck. He closed his eyes tightly. He had survived multiple combat deployments. He had navigated deadly minefields and engaged armed enemies in urban combat. He knew exactly how to fight men with rifles and explosives, but he did not know how to fight men with bank accounts and lawyers. He stood up and pulled the final eviction notice from his back pocket. The paper felt heavy now. He read the name printed at the bottom of the page: Richard Sterling, CEO, Sterling Enterprises. A single man possessed the power to destroy an entire community without ever setting foot in it. Richard Sterling did not need weapons. He used money and influence to erase people he deemed invisible. Mark crushed the paper in his fist. He felt utterly powerless. He stood alone in the empty apartment, completely unaware that a phone call later that night would place the life of Sterling's most precious possession directly into his hands. Richard sat in his home office at the penthouse. The massive mahogany desk felt cold under his hands. He reviewed the final demolition schedules for the Vista Point apartments. The legal documents required one last signature to authorize the bulldozers. He picked up his gold pen. A sudden, sharp cry pierced the heavy wooden door. It did not sound like Lily's usual panic. It sounded raw and guttural. Richard dropped the pen. He ran out of the office. He reached the main living room and froze in his tracks. Bella lay flat on the white marble floor. The golden retriever breathed in short, shallow gasps. A pool of dark red blood spread slowly from her nose and mouth, staining the pristine stone. Lily knelt right beside the dog. She did not cover her ears. She did not rock back and forth. She simply screamed, a high, continuous sound of pure terror. Her small hands fluttered uselessly over the dog's fading body. Richard moved instantly. He did not call for the maids. He did not wait for his security detail. He scooped the heavy, limp dog into his arms. Blood soaked his crisp white shirt. He yelled for his driver. They reached the Coastal Elite Veterinary Pavilion in under 10 minutes. The driver ignored every red light on the empty coastal highway. Richard carried Bella through the sliding glass doors. He bypassed the waiting room entirely. "Dr. Evans!" Richard shouted. His voice cracked loudly. "Get Dr. Evans now!" The clinic staff erupted into synchronized motion. 2 veterinary technicians rushed forward with a rolling stretcher. They transferred Bella from Richard's blood-soaked arms to the metal surface. They pushed her straight into the emergency trauma room. Dr. Evans ran down the hallway and slipped on a pair of surgical gloves. The heavy doors swung shut. A bright red sign illuminated above the frame. Red alert. Richard stood in the empty hallway. His hands shook violently. Blood covered his palms. He looked at the red stain on his expensive clothes. A man can build a fortress of glass and steel to keep the world out, but illness always finds a way to seep through the invisible cracks. He could buy city blocks, but he could not buy the next breath for a dying animal. He pulled out his phone. He began making calls. He called his executive assistant first. "Get my private jet ready," Richard ordered. "Contact every veterinary blood bank in California, Nevada, and Arizona. I need canine negative blood. I need it right now. Tell them I will pay 10 times the standard rate. Tell them I will buy the entire bank. Just find the blood." He paced the hallway. The minutes stretched into agonizing hours. His assistant called back 3 times. The answers remained identical. The specific negative blood type was critically depleted across the entire West Coast. A recent parvo outbreak had drained the regional reserves completely. No amount of money could materialize a resource that simply did not exist. The private jet sat idle on the tarmac. The millions in Richard's accounts sat useless in their digital vaults. The red light above the trauma room finally flickered off. The doors opened slowly. Dr. Evans walked out. She pulled down her blue surgical mask. Her face looked pale and exhausted. Richard stopped pacing. He stared at the doctor. He felt a cold dread settle deep in his chest. "She is stabilizing for the moment," Dr. Evans said. Her voice sounded incredibly thin. "We managed to stop the internal hemorrhaging, but she lost a massive amount of blood. Her body cannot produce new red blood cells fast enough to compensate for the sudden loss." "I have people searching every state," Richard said quickly. "We will fly the blood in." "Richard, listen to me," Dr. Evans said. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "We do not have time for flights. Bella's oxygen saturation is dropping steadily. Her major organs are beginning to shut down from the lack of oxygenated blood. If we do not begin a fresh transfusion within the next 4 hours, she will go into cardiac arrest. She will not survive the night." Richard felt the floor tilt beneath his feet. 4 hours? "Yes, doctor," Evans confirmed. And there is no blood coming from outside. I checked the national registries myself while my team operated. Every single vial of that specific negative type is gone. Richard gripped the edge of the reception desk. He thought of Lily. His daughter currently sat in the back seat of his armored SUV outside, sedated and watched over by 2 private nurses. If Bella died tonight, Lily would retreat into a dark, unreachable corner of her mind forever. The dog represented her only bridge to the human world. Richard could not let that bridge collapse. "You have a local donor," Richard said. He looked directly into Dr. Evans's eyes. "The anonymous one. The one who comes in every month. You said they just donated a few days ago." "We used that blood," Dr. Evans replied. "We used it to stabilize her during the hemorrhage. It is completely gone." "Then call them back," Richard demanded. His voice rose in desperation. "Call the owner right now. Tell them to bring the dog back." "It is a massive risk," Dr. Evans warned firmly. "They just donated. Drawing blood again so soon could severely endanger the donor dog's health." "I cannot force a client to do that." "I am not asking you to force them," Richard pleaded. The billionaire stripped away his pride. He stood in the clinic hallway looking like a terrified, helpless father. "I am asking you to beg them. Offer them $50,000. Offer them $100,000. Tell them a little girl will lose her mind if her dog dies tonight. Just make the call, Sarah. Please." Dr. Evans looked at the desperate man. She knew the strict ethical protocols. She knew the danger to the donor. But she also knew Bella. She had watched the golden retriever bring a severely autistic child back from the brink of total isolation. She took a deep breath. "I will make the call, Dr. Evans said quietly, "but I cannot guarantee he will answer. And I cannot guarantee he will agree to risk his own dog. I will explain the situation. The choice belongs entirely to him." Dr. Evans turned and walked toward her private office. She closed the heavy door behind her, leaving Richard alone in the empty hallway. The silence in the clinic felt suffocating. Richard looked at the faint red stains still visible on his expensive shoes. He closed his eyes and tried to steady his rapid breathing. He had spent his entire adult life building leverage over other people. He bought politicians, crushed competitors, and dictated terms. He believed that every person had a price, and every problem had a financial solution. Now he possessed no leverage at all. He could not threaten the donor. He could not bribe a man whose identity remained a total secret. He could only wait. The air conditioning hummed faintly above him. The clock on the wall ticked forward relentlessly. Every second that passed brought Bella closer to the edge and dragged his daughter closer to an abyss of silence. Richard Sterling lowered his head. For the first time in 30 years, he silently prayed for a miracle. The digital clock on the cheap plastic microwave read 11:42 p.m. The apartment looked stripped bare. Mark stood in the center of the small living room. He taped the last cardboard box shut. He pressed the heavy brown tape down with his thumb. The sound echoed in the empty space. He had packed his entire life into 6 boxes and 3 duffel bags. Rex lay on the bare floorboards near the front door. The German shepherd watched Mark with steady amber eyes. Dogs understand transition. They feel the disruption of their territory. Rex did not whine or pace. He simply waited for Mark to give the next command. Mark wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at the stack of boxes. He had fought the eviction hard, but the corporate machine had crushed him effortlessly. Tomorrow morning, he would load the truck. He still had not secured a new apartment. He planned to sleep in the truck bed at a rest stop on the edge of the city. He would figure out the rest later. A soldier learns to survive the immediate problem before worrying about the distant future. A sudden vibration shattered the quiet. Mark's cell phone buzzed violently on the kitchen counter. Mark frowned. He walked over and picked up the phone. The screen displayed an incoming call from the Coastal Elite Veterinary Pavilion. He stared at the glowing letters. The clinic closed at 6 o'clock. They never called outside of business hours. They certainly never called a donor at midnight. He answered the call. "Hello," Mark said. His voice sounded rough from exhaustion. "Mark?" Dr. Evans said. She breathed heavily. Her voice lacked its usual calm, professional tone. She sounded frantic. "It is Dr. Evans. I know what time it is. I know this violates every protocol." "What is wrong?" Mark asked. He stood up straight. His military instincts instantly kicked in. He recognized panic. "We have an emergency at the clinic, Doctor," Evans explained quickly. "A patient just suffered a catastrophic internal hemorrhage. We managed to stop the bleeding, but the red blood cell count dropped to a fatal level. The dog is going into organ failure. The oxygen saturation is falling fast." Mark looked at Rex. The German shepherd lifted his heavy head from the floorboards. "You need blood," Mark stated. He did not ask a question. "I need Rex." "Doctor," Evans pleaded. "I checked every registry on the West Coast. There is not a single unit of negative canine blood available anywhere. The owner offered to fly it in, but we do not have the time. If we do not start a fresh transfusion within the next 2 hours, the dog will die tonight." Mark looked down at his boots. He remembered the blood draw from just a few days ago. "He just donated," Mark said firmly. "His body is still replenishing." "I know," Dr. Evans admitted. Her voice trembled slightly. "Drawing blood again, this soon carries massive risks for Rex. It could cause severe anemia. It could shock his system. I have no right to ask this of you, but I have a desperate father standing in my hallway who is about to watch his disabled daughter lose her only connection to the world. I had to try." Mark stood in the empty apartment. He had lost his home. He had lost his fight against men with money. He had packed his life into cardboard boxes because he possessed no power in this city. A man stripped of his home and his influence often discovers his truest value in the things he can still choose to give away. Mark could not stop the bulldozers tomorrow, but he could stop death tonight. He did not hesitate. "We are leaving now," Mark said. "Have the back door open." He hung up the phone. He did not grab his jacket. He simply looked at the German shepherd. "Up, Rex!" Mark commanded. Rex jumped to his feet instantly. He sensed the sudden shift in energy. Mark grabbed his truck keys off the counter. He walked out the front door and locked it behind him. They descended the metal stairs rapidly. Mark's heavy boots clanged against the grating in the silent night. They reached the parking lot. Mark opened the passenger door. Rex leapt onto the worn seat. Mark climbed behind the wheel and turned the key. The old engine roared loudly in the quiet complex. Mark slammed the gear shifter into drive. The truck tires squealed slightly on the cracked asphalt as they sped out onto the main road. The streets of San Diego sat completely empty. The streetlights cast long, rhythmic yellow shadows across the hood of the truck. Mark pushed the accelerator down hard. The speedometer needle climbed steadily past the legal limit. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. He kept his eyes locked on the road ahead. He drove with absolute precision. He treated the drive like a combat extraction mission. He calculated the fastest route in his head. He anticipated the traffic lights and accelerated through the yellow signals before they turned red. He bypassed the main highways and used the wide industrial roads to avoid any potential police patrols. Every minute wasted meant oxygen starved from a dying brain. Rex sat perfectly still in the passenger seat. The dog braced his front paws against the dashboard as Mark took a sharp corner at high speed. The German shepherd did not bark. He understood the urgency of the moment. The bright lights of the downtown skyline appeared in the distance. The towering glass buildings looked cold and indifferent against the black sky. Mark drove straight toward the wealthiest district in the city. He passed the expensive boutiques and the luxury car dealerships. He did not look at them. He only focused on reaching the clinic. He turned onto the street behind the Coastal Elite Veterinary Pavilion. He saw the heavy metal security door at the back of the building propped open. A young veterinary technician named Paul stood in the doorway. Paul had short, messy hair and wore blue scrubs stained with small spots of blood. He looked frantically up and down the dark alley. Mark slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt right next to the entrance. He threw the vehicle into park and killed the engine. He opened his door and jumped out. He did not wait to open the passenger side. Rex followed right behind him, leaping over the center console and bounding out into the alley. Paul's eyes widened with intense relief. "Doctor, Evans is in trauma room 1, Paul said quickly, pointing down the hall. "Follow me." Mark ran into the brightly lit hallway of the clinic. The pristine white walls blurred as he moved. Rex ran right beside his leg. They rushed toward the red light shining above the trauma room doors. Mark pushed the double doors open. He stepped into the surgical suite. The smell of harsh antiseptic and metallic blood hit him instantly. He saw Dr. Evans standing over a metal table. He saw a pale golden retriever lying completely still. He saw the heart monitor flashing a dangerously low number in bright green digits. Mark did not look at the expensive equipment. He looked at Dr. Evans. "Take what you need," Mark said. He guided Rex onto the floor mat. The race against the clock had ended. The brutal fight to pull a life back from the edge began right now. Mark knelt on the cold tile floor of the trauma room. He placed his rough hand on Rex's back. The German shepherd lay down on the blue rubber mat without hesitation. He did not growl. He did not pull away. He looked at Mark with steady amber eyes and waited. Dr. Evans moved quickly. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She grabbed a fresh collection bag and a thick needle from the stainless steel cabinet. Her hands shook slightly, but she steadied them as she approached the large dog. She tied a rubber tourniquet around Rex's front leg. She swabbed the thick fur with alcohol. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled the tight space. "Hold him steady, Mark," Dr. Evans said. Her voice sounded extremely strained. "This will be a fast draw. We do not have time for a slow drip. I am taking the maximum safe volume." "Do it," Mark said simply. He gripped Rex's collar. He leaned his forehead against the dog's large head to offer comfort. Dr. Evans inserted the needle. Dark red blood rushed into the clear plastic tubing. It flowed down and began to fill the collection bag. Mark watched the bag expand rapidly. He knew the heavy risks involved. He knew the sudden drop in blood volume could trigger a severe shock in Rex's system. He knew his dog could collapse from extreme anemia. But Mark also knew that a soldier does not retreat when a life hangs in the balance. He stroked Rex's ears gently. The dog kept his breathing slow and completely even. On the other side of the glass wall, Richard stood in the dim observation room. He held Lily tightly against his chest. The little girl had stopped screaming, but her entire body continued to tremble violently. She buried her face in her father's ruined, blood-stained shirt. Richard stared through the thick glass window. He watched the man in the dark t-shirt kneeling beside the large black and tan dog. He could not see the man's face. The man kept his broad back turned to the window. Richard watched the plastic bag fill with blood. True miracles rarely arrive with flashes of blinding light and loud noises. They usually happen in quiet, sterile rooms through the slow, steady drip of gravity. Richard felt the heavy truth of that observation deep in his bones. He possessed billions of dollars, a fleet of private jets, and an army of corporate lawyers. Yet, none of those powerful things could manufacture the dark red liquid flowing from that unknown dog into the plastic bag. Dr. Evans pulled the needle out of the vein. She pressed a thick gauze pad against Rex's leg and wrapped it tightly with blue medical tape. Mark immediately handed Rex a high-calorie treat from his pocket. The German shepherd chewed it slowly. He looked extremely tired, but he kept his head up. Dr. Evans did not pause to thank them. She grabbed the warm bag of blood and rushed back to the surgical table. Bella lay completely motionless under the bright lights. The green line on the heart monitor dipped dangerously low. The machine emitted a slow, dreadful beep. Dr. Evans connected the blood bag to the intravenous line already inserted into Bella's leg. She opened the plastic valve. The dark red blood from Rex began its journey down the clear tube. It entered the golden retriever's failing body. Richard pressed his hand flat against the glass. He held his breath. He watched the slow drip in the plastic chamber, drop by drop. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The heavy silence in the observation room felt like a physical weight pressing down on Richard's shoulders. Slowly, the rhythm of the heart monitor began to change. The slow, dreadful beeps shifted into a faster, steadier tempo. The green line peaked higher with every single heartbeat. Bella took a deep, sudden breath. Her chest expanded fully for the first time in hours. The pale, deathly white color of her gums slowly faded, replaced by a faint, healthy pink hue. She opened her eyes. They looked tired and heavily medicated, but they held focus. She weakly lifted her head from the metal table and let out a soft, low whine. Lily heard the sound. The little girl lifted her head from Richard's chest. She turned her tear-stained face toward the glass. She saw the golden retriever looking directly in her direction. Lily let out a long, shuddering breath. The violent trembling stopped entirely. The intense panic drained out of her small body. She reached out and touched the glass with her fingers. She smiled a very small, fragile smile. Then, pure exhaustion overtook her. Lily closed her eyes, rested her head against her father's shoulder, and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. Richard stood frozen. He listened to his daughter's steady breathing. He looked at the golden retriever resting comfortably on the table. The terrible nightmare had ended. The invisible wall of terror that trapped his daughter had shattered. He felt an overwhelming wave of relief wash over him, followed immediately by an intense, burning gratitude. He carefully carried Lily out of the observation room. He walked down the hall to the private waiting suite. He laid her gently on the soft leather sofa and covered her with a warm blanket. He stepped back out into the hallway. He needed to find the donor. He needed to find the man who had answered the phone in the middle of the night and raced across the city to save his world. Richard walked to Dr. Evans's private office. The door stood slightly open. He walked in and waited. A few minutes later, Dr. Evans entered the room. She looked completely drained. She took off her surgical cap and wiped her forehead. "Bella is stable," Dr. Evans said. She leaned heavily against her desk. "Her vitals are strong. The transfusion worked perfectly. She will sleep through the night, but she is out of the woods." Richard reached into his tailored jacket pocket. He pulled out a leather checkbook and a heavy gold pen. He opened the book and signed his name at the bottom of a blank check. He did not write a number. He tore the check from the pad and placed it firmly on the center of the doctor's desk. "I owe that man everything," Richard said. His voice carried the absolute authority of a billionaire accustomed to getting his exact way. "I do not care about your clinic rules. I do not care about the confidentiality agreements. That man just gave my daughter her life back." Dr. Evans looked down at the blank check. She shook her head. "Richard, put your money away," she said quietly. "I cannot tell you his name. I promised him total anonymity. He does not want your money. He never has." "Everyone wants something," Richard stated flatly. He tapped his index finger against the paper. "Write down any number you think is fair. Write down $1 million. Write down 2. I will not leave this clinic until I look that man in the eye and give him what he deserves. I am not asking you this time, Sarah. Tell me who he is." Dr. Evans stood her ground. She crossed her arms over her chest. "The answer is no, Richard. The donor is resting with his dog in the recovery room down the hall. They will leave through the back door in 10 minutes. You will not follow them. You will respect their privacy." "That is my final word." Richard stared at her. He felt a surge of frustration mixed with deep curiosity. A man who refused money simply did not exist in his world. He turned around and walked out of the office. He did not plan to leave the clinic. He planned to find the answer himself. Richard walked out of the doctor's private office. He refused to leave the building. He moved slowly down the pristine white corridor toward the rear recovery rooms. He needed to intercept the man before he vanished into the night. He walked past the closed wooden doors, listening intently for any signs of movement. He heard a man and a large German shepherd emerged from the final room near the back exit. The man wore a simple black t-shirt, dark denim jeans, and heavy military boots. He moved with a rigid, disciplined posture. He held a leather leash in his right hand, but the German shepherd walked perfectly at his side without any tension on the line. The dog had a thick blue bandage wrapped tightly around its right front leg. Richard stepped forward to speak, but the words died instantly in his throat. The clinic's bright fluorescent lights illuminated the man's face perfectly. Richard knew that face. He did not know the man personally, but he had seen that exact face sitting on his massive mahogany desk earlier that very week. His head of corporate security had placed a thick file on the desk. The file contained surveillance photographs of the primary instigators at the Vista Point apartments. The man in the photos had stood outside the local news station holding a protest sign. He had organized the disabled veterans in the courtyard. He was the main obstacle to the Ocean View Oasis project. Richard Sterling stared at the man he had legally evicted just hours ago. Dr. Evans walked out of the recovery room right behind Mark. She held a medical clipboard against her chest. "Mark, wait!" Dr. Evans called out softly. The man stopped and turned around. The German shepherd immediately sat by his left leg and waited. "I need you to monitor him closely for the next 48 hours, Dr. Evans instructed. She handed Mark a small brown paper bag. "These are high-grade iron supplements. Give him one with every meal. If he shows any signs of extreme lethargy or pale gums, you call me immediately, day or night. Do not hesitate." "Understood," Mark replied. His voice sounded calm, steady, and completely devoid of panic. "And Mark," Dr. Evans added. She looked down at the floor, then back up at him. Her eyes looked wet. "Thank you. You saved a family tonight. Just keep the dog alive," Mark said quietly. He turned back toward the rear exit door. Richard could not stay hidden anymore. The initial shock gave way to a desperate, burning need to fix the impossible situation. A man used to buying his way out of every consequence finds himself paralyzed when faced with pure, uncompensated grace. He stepped out from the shadows and stood directly in the center of the hallway. Mark stopped. He looked at the wealthy, older man blocking the exit. He recognized Richard Sterling instantly. The billionaire's arrogant face dominated the local newspapers and the bold eviction notices plastered on Mark's front door. The hallway fell completely silent. Dr. Evans gasped quietly. She stepped forward to intervene, but Richard held up his hand to stop her. "You?" Richard said. His voice barely rose above a rough whisper. He looked at the strong, stoic man, then down at the large German shepherd. The dog looked exhausted, carrying a fresh bandage from the thick needle that had just saved Bella's life. Mark did not speak. He kept his face completely blank. A trained soldier gives nothing away to the enemy. He stood his ground. "You are the anonymous donor," Richard stated. He felt his chest tighten painfully. The heavy reality of the situation crashed down on his shoulders. The man who had rushed across the city at midnight, the man who had risked his own dog to save a stranger's pet, was the exact same man Richard was currently throwing out onto the cold street. "Excuse me," Mark said coldly. He stepped to the side to bypass the billionaire. "Wait," Richard pleaded. He moved quickly to block the path again. His hands shook visibly. He reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out the blank check he had offered Dr. Evans earlier. He held the piece of paper out toward Mark. "Please. I did not know it was you. I did not know any of this." Mark looked down at the piece of paper, trembling in Richard's hand. "My daughter," Richard continued, his voice breaking with genuine emotion. "Bella is the only thing keeping my little girl connected to this world. You just saved her life. I owe you everything. Take this check. Write down any amount you want. Buy a new house. Buy a new life. Just let me repay the debt." Mark did not reach for the check. He looked directly into Richard's eyes. The billionaire expected to see anger. He expected to see a desperate man eager to cash in on a golden opportunity. Instead, he saw only quiet pity. "You think everything has a price tag," Mark said. His voice carried no anger, only a heavy, immovable truth. "You think you can destroy my home in the morning and buy my forgiveness at night?" "I will stop the eviction," Richard said quickly. He lowered the check slightly, desperate to negotiate. "I will cancel the legal notices tomorrow morning. You can stay in your apartment as long as you want, rent-free. You will never have to pay a single dime." Mark shook his head slowly. "You do not understand." "Then make me understand," Richard begged. "Tell me what you want." "I do not want your money," Mark stated clearly. "I do not want a free apartment for myself while you tear down the homes of my neighbors. Those people fought for this country. They bled for it in wars you only read about. Mr. Henderson can barely walk because of shrapnel in his leg. Tom lost a limb overseas. They have absolutely nothing left in this world but that building." Mark looked down at Rex. He rested his large hand on the dog's head. The German shepherd leaned into the touch. "We did not come here tonight to make a business deal," Mark said. He looked back up at Richard. "We came because a life was ending, and we had the power to stop it. We do not sell life. We give it freely." Richard stood frozen in the hallway. The blank check felt like a useless piece of trash in his hand. He had spent his entire life building leverage, and now he stood entirely powerless before a man who possessed absolutely nothing of material value. Mark stepped past Richard. He pushed the heavy metal door open. The cool night air rushed into the sterile hallway. He walked out into the dark alley with his dog. He did not look back. Richard remained in the hallway. He stared at the closed metal door for a long time. He looked down at the blank check. He slowly crumpled the paper into a tight ball in his fist. He realized, with crushing clarity, that gratitude from the powerful always rings hollow when it comes with selfish conditions. He thought about Lily sleeping peacefully in the other room. He thought about the men packing cardboard boxes in the dark across the city. The contrast sickened him. Richard Sterling, the ruthless CEO, died in that hallway. A father, humbled and broken by a poor soldier's grace, stood in his place. He had to make a choice. He could keep his luxury resort and live with the shame forever, or he could finally use his immense power to protect the people he had spent his life stepping on. Mark drove the faded blue truck back to the Vista Point apartments. The sky began to turn light gray in the east. He parked in his usual spot. Rex sat in the passenger seat and rested his head on his paws. Mark turned off the engine. He sat in the quiet cabin for a long moment. He had saved a life tonight, but he had still lost his home. He opened the door and stepped out into the cool morning air. Across the city, Richard Sterling sat in the back of his armored SUV. Lily slept soundly in the seat next to him, her head resting on a soft pillow. Richard looked out the window at the towering glass buildings he owned. He felt entirely empty. He had spent decades measuring his worth by the size of his bank accounts and the fear in his competitors' eyes. Now he understood the brutal truth. A man can buy the entire world, but he cannot buy a single breath for the person he loves. True power does not come from taking things away from others. True power comes from the ability to protect the vulnerable. Sometimes the heaviest chains a man wears are forged from his own pride, and it takes an act of pure, uncompensated grace to finally shatter them. Richard pulled his phone from his pocket. The digital clock read 5 a.m. He dialed his lead corporate attorney. "It is 5 in the morning, Richard," the attorney answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Is there an emergency?" "Cancel the demolition orders for the Vista Point apartments," Richard commanded. His voice carried a new, grounded authority. "Halt all eviction proceedings immediately. Draft a document transferring the property deed into a permanent trust for the current residents. Do it now." "Richard, you are talking about a $50 million land deal," the attorney said, suddenly wide awake. "The board will panic." "Let them panic," Richard stated firmly. "I own the controlling shares. Draw up the papers. I want them ready to sign by 7 o'clock. He hung up the phone. He looked down at his sleeping daughter. For the first time in years, Richard Sterling felt genuine peace. The sun rose over the Vista Point apartments. The bright light offered no warmth to the residents. Mark walked down the metal stairs, carrying 2 heavy military duffel bags. He tossed them into the back of his truck. He walked over to Mr. Henderson's unit. The old man struggled to lift a cardboard box filled with kitchen supplies. Mark took the box from his hands and carried it to a waiting taxi. "Thank you, Mark," Mr. Henderson said. His voice sounded hollow. "I do not know how to start over at my age." "You just take it one step at a time," Mark said. He tried to sound encouraging, but the words felt incredibly heavy. A low rumble interrupted the quiet morning. 3 black SUVs turned into the cracked parking lot. They parked in a neat line near the center courtyard. The residents stopped packing and stared. They expected the demolition crews or the local police. The door of the lead vehicle opened. Richard Sterling stepped out. He did not wear his expensive tailored jacket. He wore a simple button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He carried a thick leather folder. He walked directly toward Mark. Mark stood his ground. He crossed his arms over his chest. Rex sat dutifully by his side, watching the approaching billionaire with sharp amber eyes. Richard stopped a few feet away. He looked around the courtyard. He saw the worn faces of the veterans. He saw the packed boxes and the profound despair he had caused. He took a deep breath. "I came to deliver this personally," Richard said. He held out the leather folder to Mark. "I already received my notice," Mark replied coldly. "This is not an eviction notice," Richard said. He opened the folder. He pulled out a crisp legal document. "This is a deed of trust. I have permanently transferred ownership of this entire complex to a veteran housing coalition. I have also established a fully funded endowment to completely renovate every single unit in this building. Nobody is leaving today. Nobody is ever leaving." The courtyard fell absolutely silent. Mr. Henderson dropped his walking cane. It clattered loudly against the concrete. Mark looked at the document. He read the bold legal text. He looked back up at Richard. He searched the older man's face for a trap. He found none. He only saw quiet, profound humility. "Why?" Mark asked simply. "Because you taught me a lesson I should have learned a long time ago," Richard answered. His voice carried clearly across the courtyard. "You showed me the true value of a life. You protected my family when I tried to destroy yours. I cannot change the man I was yesterday, but I can change what I do today. I bought the empty lot adjacent to this property. Next month, construction begins on a state-of-the-art animal rescue and veterinary clinic. It will provide free care for every service animal and veteran's pet in this city." Richard looked down at Rex. The German shepherd tilted his head slightly. "Thank you," Richard said directly to the soldier, "for everything." Richard turned around and walked back to his vehicle. He did not wait for applause. He did not ask for a photo opportunity. He simply got into the SUV and drove away. The news broke later that afternoon. The local media went wild. Corporate analysts expressed absolute shock at Sterling's sudden change of heart. Reporters swarmed the apartment complex, trying to secure interviews. Mark ignored them all. He used his military discipline to coordinate the immediate return of the residents' belongings. He helped Mr. Henderson carry his boxes back into his ground-floor unit. He unpacked his own bags and placed his few items back into his apartment. The heavy dread completely vanished from the air, replaced by an overwhelming sense of hope and security. 6 months passed. The Vista Point apartments looked entirely different. Fresh paint covered the exterior walls. New landscaping filled the courtyard with bright, healthy plants. Construction crews worked rapidly on the new animal rescue facility right next door. The sound of hammers and saws felt like music to the residents. It was a warm Sunday morning. Mark walked down the fresh concrete path of the courtyard. He wore a clean gray t-shirt and jeans. Rex walked confidently by his side. The German shepherd had fully recovered from the massive blood draw. His coat shone brightly in the sunlight. His amber eyes looked sharp and alert. They passed Mr. Henderson sitting on his front porch. The old veteran watered a row of colorful, blooming flowers in bright ceramic pots. He looked rested and healthy. "Morning, Mark," Mr. Henderson called out with a wide smile. "Beautiful day." "Morning, Mr. Henderson," Mark replied. "It certainly is." Mark and Rex continued their walk. They approached the edge of the property where the new clinic stood half-finished. A sleek black car parked near the construction fence. Richard Sterling stood near the car. He held Lily's hand. The little girl smiled brightly. Bella, the golden retriever, stood next to her. The dog looked perfectly healthy, her golden coat thick and vibrant. Richard saw Mark approaching. He did not walk over to intrude. He simply caught Mark's eye and offered a slow, respectful nod. Mark returned the nod. They were two men from completely different worlds, forever linked by a single act of quiet heroism. Mark looked down at his German shepherd. He patted Rex on the thick neck. They turned and walked toward the ocean. They did not need wealth or recognition. They had each other. They had their home, and they knew exactly what their lives were worth. Sometimes in life, we believe that power and wealth can solve every problem. We build walls of success, thinking they will protect us from the trials of the world. But as Mark and Rex showed us, the greatest value a soul can possess is not found in a bank account. It is found in the willingness to give when you have nothing left, to offer life when your own world is falling apart. True strength is not about the leverage we hold over others, but the grace we extend to those in need. I truly believe that every single day gives us a chance to be that kind of light for someone else, whether they are a stranger, an old friend, or a loyal animal companion. May God bless you and your family with peace, health, and a heart full of compassion. Please type Amen in the comments if you believe in the power of a selfless act. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your loved ones. Leave a comment below with your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories.